but we do stuff, whether it's going to see a rugby game or going cycling, which will open us up to our ideas of how we can expand the business and how we can move forward. But the definite challenge is
there was one distinct moment, and we've still got to do. Chris said, if you hit this target, there's no way on earth with this idea you're ever going to hit this target. I will.
And you plug that one, and another one will come up, and they're the problems. And the advice I always give to anyone who starts a business and says to me, "Yeah, we just got that one problem. It's stressing me out, but once I've got rid of that problem, I think I'll be fine." I always say, "No, your problem is."
What if the opposite of what you thought was true? What if your limiting belief wasn't there? What if you could compete with the biggest out there? What if you could have more fun and do more things?
Welcome back to the second series of Unfiltered. This is the show where we celebrate the imperfect, the unvarnished, and the unashamedly raw journeys that shape our growth. We're bringing you dynamic duos who've propelled each other forward through thick and thin. This series is going to be bigger, bolder, and this time, thanks to our friends at the Marketing Academy, global. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Unfiltered, brought to you by the Growth Distillery in collaboration with our friends at the Marketing Academy. So what does it take to disrupt an established industry while staying sane in the process? Gary Elphick and Chris Rayleigh didn't just start a business, they reimagined the entire sports equipment game. As the founders of Disrupt Sports, they brought custom on-demand manufacturing to a space that hadn't changed in decades, building a business that has grown to be an industry leader across 5 continents with over 400 unique custom product lines. And doing so, they've managed to do all of this as co-founders on opposite sides of the globe. And to note, this is just one of 3 businesses that they've co-founded together. But as always, disruption can come at a cost, from burnout to uncertainty to the pressure of keeping pushing. In this episode, we're going to unpack the highs, the hard lessons, and what it really takes to scale something that breaks the mold without breaking yourself. Gary, Chris, thank you so much for joining us. I can't wait to dive in. So what I'd like to do is start at the very beginning with the two of you. You are our first pair of co-founders on this series of Unfiltered. So I'd like to take us back to the beginning. How did the two of you meet? When did you realise that this was someone that I wanted to build a business with?
Maybe you should take that one when we first.
Yeah, I'll go. So Gary and I actually went to university together nearly 20 years ago. And we kind of knew of each other probably. But I wouldn't say we were like friends or best friends, just kind of would see him on a night out. And then we went our separate ways. Gary moved to Australia and did and worked there. I stayed in the UK and worked. I ran a ski company. And then after probably 9 years, I left that and decided to move to Australia. And after a couple of months, I was like, oh, I knew that guy Gary from university. Grab him for a beer, and we kind of met up for a beer, and the rest was history. Really, we had an idea about selling surfboards to individuals, and then we started doing that where people could customize a surfboard. We then moved on to skateboards and yoga mats, and then I think we had maybe Red Bull contact us and said we'll buy 300. We were suddenly like, why are we selling one? And then that's kind of how the business took off. So we were never really like best friends hanging out with each other. And then one day we were like, hey, let's do a business. It kind of organically happened. Was that right in saying that, Gary?
I always say, she's like, Chris always tells me that he was cool at you. And I actually did. I looked up to Chris. He was a couple of years older and he ran a ski company, which was mainly just a bunch of people drinking on the slopes. But I've never admitted it to her in front of him. But I'm gonna go for a beer, and we need every help we can get in that bit. And yeah, like Chris said, it just kind of like went from there. We realised that we actually got on really well professionally and as friends, and the rest, as they say, is history.
And so, was there much consideration put into picking one another as business partners and going on your merry way, or was it really just one of those serendipitous orbits that you find each other in?
I would say it's kind of weird because the way we've morphed into our roles now is Gary's very much the forefront, the sales side, the front of it, and I'm, for lack of a better phrase, the rear end, doing the operational side and hold it together. But certainly when we first started, I was like, stand back, I'll do sales, and Gary's like, okay, I'll like try and do the orders and things like that. And then over years we kind of have figured out where each other's strengths are. So yeah, we didn't really start at day one and go, right, you do this and I'll do that.
I was just going to say, like, I think the as businesses grow, they grow organically as well, and in the same way, like, look, you can, to give an analogy on there, like you can purposefully date and go on an app and find someone, or you can just bump into someone in a bar and have a connection. And I think for in the business sense, Chris and I had a connection where we got on well together, and it was the right time in our lives to be exploring doing something exciting on there. And as the business grew, we just kind of figured out our roles in there. Like, what are we good at? What do we want to spend our time doing? How does that work from a time zone perspective? What people can we bring in to replace roles that we have? And you kind of just figure it out as you go, I think.
I think the key thing for us was, in the nicest way I can say this, we weren't really friends to start. So it wasn't like, we were two best friends that went into it like, oh, we've got this huge dream. We were just kind of like, hey, I kind of know you, you kind of know me. Let's have a beer and see what happens. And because you see so many people who are like best friends and they start a business together and then they realize, oh, that annoys me about him, or I've never noticed they do that, or this, that. Whereas we went into it with no preconceptions. And I mean, now Gary married me and my wife. Like we're so close now, but at the start we never
that's what it is.
Gary, you have a side hustle as a celebrant.
Yeah, he did.
Work out, then we got to go on there.
And so, how do you? I'm curious, as two co-founders who are both hitching, their rides to a single wagon. How do you organically figure out where the waterline of one person starts and the other stops?
Good question.
I usually say no, Gary.
That's normally where it is. I think going back to it changes. It changes a lot quicker in the early days because you've got this middle bit. You're like, well, who's going to do legal? Who's going to do complaints? Who's going to do this thing? You kind of figure out and see what fits. And then other bits of the business are busier at other times. And you kind of like, I don't know, you just kind of figure it out as you go. And then as you start to build employees in there, you've got to be able to section off work and go, okay, what can we hand? If we hand this off, what does that give us time and ability to do? And I think if you look now, like we have fairly defined roles, but there's still crossover. There's crossover because Chris is asleep when I'm awake, and I'm awake when Chris is asleep, and vice versa. So there's some stuff, and that's the benefit of being able to make that work is like we have got 24-hour coverage for customers globally, so that's and the team that's global. So if something goes wrong or we have to try and figure something out, we can pass it over. So I think being in different spaces has meant that we both had to expand our skill sets. Like we both had to learn bits that we wouldn't have otherwise have done if we were in the same room, and that was definitely a challenge for me. I don't know about you, but Chris, but definitely for me at the beginning. Kind of like both grown as individuals in there, then we've managed to take on bits of both those roles.
So for those that don't know, I'm talking to you across two very different continents. Gary, you are based currently where?
Oh, I'm based in Sydney, but I'm in beautiful San Diego, and I'm sure Chris will attest that the UK has got the same weather as San Diego right now.
And Chris, you are currently?
I'm in the southwest, a place called Bristol, which is not near a beach or any sunny weather. And rains in the middle of July.
This dynamic of sort of scaling a business across continents, I think is something that's very unique. Certainly something I haven't experienced, in the people that we've spoken to on the podcast before. I'm curious the tension that plays out between needing to stay connected as co-founders and, make sure that there is a healthy level of dialogue, making decisions, that are congruent to the vision that you guys share versus the need just by virtue of when one's asleep and one's awake to pass the baton like a relay. How do you go about that? What are the principles that you gents apply as co-founders to make that work?
Yeah, I guess there's two things that kind of run in silo. One is the day-to-day running of the business, which is very much like passing the baton, as you said. And there's not many, we'll at least exchange a few messages every day, and generally that just kind of carries on. And then the other side of it is the growth of the business, the bigger stuff. What's next? How we're going to move forward, and we kind of tackle that by meeting at least, at very least, 2 times a year. Which as much my wife will detest its work, we will try and meet somewhere that is kind of social. Because if Gary and I met and all we did was sat in a boardroom, we would sit in front of a screen and we would get minimal time out of it. But we do stuff, whether it's going to see a rugby game or going cycling, which will open us up to our ideas of how we can expand the business and how we can move forward. But the definite challenge is when you have those day-to-day maintenance, and then you suddenly have a big issue, and you're like, oh, okay, like there's a big problem here, or there's a big obstacle. We have a window of probably about 30 minutes or an hour where I kind of run out of the steam at the end of the day, and Gary comes bustling in at the start of the day, like, hey, what's going on? And I'm like, I'm ready to go home. And that's where the challenge becomes quite apparent, because you can't work on that time. But equally, that's what we've learned over the span of 10, 12 years is we know each other so well that even when I don't get a chance to speak to Gary, or Gary doesn't get a chance to speak to me, I can probably tell you what his answer is going to be, and vice versa.
If you hark back to sort of when this all began, though, I can imagine that there would have been some pretty interesting growing pains where there's that leap of faith, right? You couldn't anticipate 10 times out of 10 where Gary's going to land from a decision-making perspective. But while you're asleep in the middle of the night, something's gone wrong, we get to move into crisis management mode, and he's got to make that call. Is there an example that we can talk through where you've had to then break new ground as a pair of co-founders on different time zones and kind of take that leap of faith?
I think a lot of it, I mean, to go from where it was, I think a lot more of that in the early stages. Again, just whilst you're kind of learning about each other and about how each other handles things and those pieces. Like now, it's great because we know exactly what. No, it's a bit like having kids on there. Like kids can't go to one parent and expect a different answer because they're going to get the same answer from both, and that's taken more than a decade to get to that point on there. There's definitely been bits like, look, my strengths are in the vision and the future of the company, and Chris is the glue that holds the whole thing together across the world. So, but there's been times where something might go wrong and he's asleep, and I have to jump in. I'm not the operational one, so I have to try and understand. Okay, well, what will Chris do? What will Chris do in this situation? And hope that's the best, and then check in afterwards and see how he'd handle it differently. And that's been my personal growth, is learning the ins and outs of the working of the business. And equally, like, I have to make sure that I spend time taking Chris along the vision of where, and checking in and getting his feedback on where we want to go on there. I think one of the most important things we've had since the real early days is, and we always just call it like the no bullshit rule. Like you can go, right, you know what, like, no bullshit, we're gonna have a conversation now. These are the hard conversations that we've got to have, because something is eating away at one of us, and it might hurt the other one's feelings, it might grate on them, but like kind of like a disclaimer that I'm going to say something now that it might not upset you a little bit, but it's no bullshit, because it's like I'm just going to talk about it straight up, and that has allowed us, I think, to get closer as individuals and as business partners in there. And I guess, like, what's the point in any of this unless you having fun whilst you do it? And that comes back to what I was saying about the social side there. Like, I really value that time because we get to get out and actually hang out as we would do if we were in the same location. And what they say, like, the best ideas come whilst you're in the shower. They're not when you're sitting in front of your desk. So, like, when you are having those,
just confirm, I've never been in the shower with Gary.
One time, no, joking. He did decide he would take me surprise skydiving last. So I thought we were going out for like something nice on a boat, and we got there and he's like, no, you got to jump out of a plane now, which is great because that's his sport, but terrible for me when I'm scared shitless of it.
I'm sensing this amazing dynamic about sort of codependent learning, like, but not just as co-founders in a business, but as you've mentioned, Gary, almost by necessity, you've had to rapidly understand sort of the minimum viable product of what Chris does, because if something goes really pear-shaped, you've got to try to act as a proxy for him. I might start with you, Chris. What's the most important thing that you've learnt from Gary as part of your co-founding partnership?
Never let the truth get in the way of a good story. No.
Did you see what he did there? He just blamed you. He blamed you for taking you skydiving.
No, I think something that Gary does very well is presenting and building a story, and something that which I've always learned from him is to bring it back to your point. Like, make sure you have a point, make sure you have a purpose, make sure you're understanding what you're trying to show, what you're trying to perceive, and not kind of just go in blindly like, and especially for me, like, when we first started, we had probably 6 months working together, and then we kind of divided and conquered. And I think in those 6 months, Gary would be the speaker more, and then when we split up, I'd have to do a lot more speaking, and he'd always like coach me through that bit. So yeah, I think definitely the confidence to kind of know what you're trying to get and what you're saying.
Gary, what are you most proud of that Chris has taught you?
I think Chris teaches me a lot on a daily basis. On the thing is, I pull in one direction and Chris pulls in the other direction, and we hopefully meet in the middle. So a lot about what we do is on-demand manufacturing in each location, and so that's meant like we've had to. When I'm in location, I've got to get involved with the manufacturing side. I have to understand the processes and the procedures and the people, and I don't think there'll be any surprises from anyone in our team that the people side is not my strong point in there, and so learning how people are motivated and how to keep a team progressing, I think that's probably been my key part. And then really just on the back end, understanding like Chris is very level-headed. He can solve any problem. Nothing I've ever thrown at him, and I've thrown a lot of stuff at him. Nothing I've ever thrown at him is kind of just taking him outside of his sphere of understanding and of confidence. Whereas I'm a bit more of a hothead, and I have to learn to chill out a little bit more with some of the things that can go wrong. So I think he's kind of brought me back down to earth on a day-to-day basis. Even
through a screen, there's this amazing mutual respect that I can see the two of you have for one another. And I think that if there ever was a silver lining for you having to scale businesses from across the continents, what you've learnt from one another, I think you've both effortlessly given me something, I think more effortlessly than a lot of the people that we've had on this program. I'm going to push you a little bit further, and I might start with you, Gary, on this one.
Because he knows I've got a lot of dirt on him, and vice versa as well.
And that's why I'm coming. That's why I'm coming to you first, Gary. What's Chris let go of in the time? This thing that was holding him back when you guys started on your merry way, that you look back now and go, it's just made him a much better practitioner.
And you can stop me if it's too much on there, Chris, but I think Chris has learnt to think a bit bigger. I think I had to prove myself, right? Like, he'd be like, that's never going to happen, we can never get to there. And it was like, oh, we got there. And then it was like, well, we're going to get to here and we're going to do that. No, that's not possible. Okay, cool, well, we've got there. And I think after a few times of that, like, as much as Chris will say, don't let the truth get away with a good story, like, you've got to prove those bits there and thinking a bit bigger. I think that is what Chris has learned from that side. I think that's learn to let go of it's not possible. It's not possible. It's just how are we going to do it, not if we can do it.
Chris, what's Gary let go of that you're most proud of in the time that you've been together?
I think oh gosh, he's got dirt on me. No, I think that Gary has really understood now that he's probably not going to like me saying this. You have to spend money. Gary, for a long time, especially when we were starting, everything was done on a shoestring budget. Everyone was eating noodles. Everyone was, and then certainly when we scaled a bit more, it was like, what, we're spending this much? No, 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 no. Let's, we never used to spend that much. And now he's kind of come around to like, okay, actually, if I invest a bit more money here, that will make a bit more
Mm.
growth, and that will, as long as it makes sense and we're not spending just for the sake of it. He's really understood that's kind of how we will grow.
Mm.
I think
And
that's something I've really struggled with. I really struggled with that. You go from 0 to 1 part, and like Chris was saying there, we used to find, and like I love those days. I look back with such fond memories. But we used to find who was having meetups that would have pizza, so we could go and eat that
Mm.
night. And like it was the
Yeah.
mm.
we had my bedroom in our shared flat was our storage room, and I couldn't even find the bed at sometimes. It was that level of like bootstrapping there, and like I don't know if I could do it again, but it was super fun whilst you're doing it, and it's hard to move through that like scarcity mindset into okay, cool. Like you have to be able to run a business properly. You've got to make sure that people are paid well and that you invest into marketing and do all those things, and you start to think more like a business owner rather than trying to just hold on to everything in there. But that's something that I definitely have struggled with.
I want to double click on something that you've just mentioned there. This shift in mindset from when you are embryonic as a business, right? Bootstrap, that scarcity mindset, to when you're then into scaling a business. And to Chris's point, you've got to spend money to make money. Are there any other areas where you've had to sort of unshackle yourself from something that set you up for success in that first sort of phase of business growth, that then starts to do a disservice, and you've really got to cross the Rubicon, as they say, and adopt a really different posture as co-founders?
Yeah, I've probably got a couple on that. I think everything shifts at every moment. Like the marketing channels you use, like in the early days, again, like just fun memories. We spent so much time posting like fake ads through like Gumtree and Facebook and other local listings, and the whole thing was just like, where can you just find customers to come to you? We wanted someone. So at that point, we had a platform you could design your own surfboard up, and we'd make it locally on there. And so we were just trying to find people to do that. And so it was like that stuff doesn't scale very well, and you have to move out of that hacky mindset to be like, okay, how can you still keep that level of like agility in there, but you've got to find stuff that scales a bit more on there. And I think the same thing that I always think about business as an hourglass. Like you've got to go wide, and then you've got to cut all the crap and come back to what works and what scales and what's profitable. Then you've got to keep trialing new R&D and expand, and then you've got to keep remembering to cut back on there. And I think even that's for us, that's been products. Certain products don't do so well. They don't travel so well. They don't, like some of the products we make, people won't come back for 5 or 6 years because fortunately we've made a great product, and they don't need so many of them. So is that the best product range to offer on there? Okay, like some markets are better than other markets. Everything we make is domestically manufactured. So some locations have a great remit for that. Some places don't. So just kind of ebbing and flowing. And I think there's one even recently, like when we first started off, we would just want as many leads and as many people inquiring as possible. But you start to realize that not all inquiries are made equal. So how do you start self filter people out? How do you help them self-service? Like you really got to start to think about like the core dynamics of the business, as opposed to just open the floodgates and let them all come in.
Time becomes a much scarcer resource.
Yeah, I mean, people and time, they're your, that's, I think that's why so many tools are around, why you can spend so much on automation as well, because time is super valuable.
Chris, I'd love your perspective on this.
Yeah, I think, Gary will still say now, I really struggled because, I mean, people who know me, I'm a little bit of a control freak, and for a long time, I wanted to know every order that was coming in, every like person, how's it done, how's it, and that's great when you're in that startup stage, because that level of quality control, you're making sure everything is done so well. But then as you start to scale, like I couldn't hold it all. There was a point where I was trying to do every single thing, and Gary just had to hammer me to start letting go. And even when we hired more and more people, it was like I'd sit on their shoulders and be like, "Oh, can we have a call just to make sure you're doing that? Can you?" And Gary would be like, "Just you have to let them do it." So I still now, like I still struggle with that, because I think certainly when you're starting a business, you put your all in it. In your eyes, you're the best person who knows to do it. I did this from the start, whereas now I kind of adapted, and I'm like, I'm not the best person to do that job anymore. We've hired someone who's better than me, and they will do it better than me. And sometimes I need to just keep my nose out.
Have there been examples where you haven't been able to align from a philosophical or an approach perspective, and there's sort of this disagree and commit as co-founders, or is it, is there always a middle ground that you can broadly align on? I think I've gotten two very very different postures. Yeah. Gary's gone very one way, and Chris, you've gone the other. I feel as though there's an answer here.
You go, Chris.
I mean, we kind of use the come round. There's obviously we don't end every day by saying, and that's right, let's high five and carry on with our day as we, I'd say it wouldn't be a healthy relationship if we didn't challenge each other and kind of give each other a different perspective. But generally, like, I tend to play devil's advocate. Gary will say, "Hey, why don't we do this?" And I'll say, "Oh, what about this? Or what about that?" And I guess the way I kind of see it is for Gary to either go, "Yep, you're right. You've looked at it with your glass half full and gone, that's a bad idea," or for Gary to say, "Stop being a pessimist. This can work." And to be honest, it's usually the latter, and I go, "Yeah, okay," and then we push on forward. But
he's giving you the tee up, Gary.
It's that kind of it's that kind of challenge each other, I guess, that and giving each other's perspective, because we are kind of different in that perspective. Gary's usually up here saying, like, let's build a space rocket, and I'm usually down here saying, no, let's just do one thing at a time, and we kind of pull each other to that middle ground. So I wouldn't say we disagree. We each perspective that kind of we hit in the middle quite nicely.
Gary, would you agree?
Gary's
disagree?
Say something completely different now.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Same truth, but different lens on it, I think. I mean, I just want to know. I focus on where are we going to be in a couple of years' time, and Chris tends to look at, I can't look that far. I need to know what we're doing in the next 6 months, and I think that always brings me back down. I think he once described it as like, we'll have that discussion and we'll figure out what that piece is. Then I'll give Gary some pocket money and keep him out of everyone's way, and that's great for everybody. It's basically like, look, this is the thing. You've got, okay, cool. Well, you've got like this amount of money, and you've got 6 months, and if it works, then that's great. And if not, at least it keeps you out of everyone's hair and that thing. And there was one distinct moment, and we've still got to do. Chris said, if you hit this target, there's no way on earth with this idea you're ever going to hit this target. I will eat my hat. And I was like, I'm going to hold you to that. And it was not that long ago that we hit that target. And so next time that we get to meet, we'll be having that hat, and I think it's just those bits, though, right? Pull and push. Give enough, like, okay, I'm not sure about it, but don't kind of bet the house on it. Okay, well, I'll build this and figure those bits out from there.
And what happens when you get it wrong?
And you've got to get it. What do they say? You've only got to get it right 51% of the time, and I think that's you get things wrong all the time, and I think that's definitely been the bit for me. Spending more time in the US, they have such a more forward focused. Understanding of technology and momentum, because there's always someone clipping at your heels, and so constantly pushing for what's next, constantly understanding of like trialing new things. I think that's been why we've been successful in a lot of these markets as well. And when we get it wrong, you got to learn from it. Why did this not work? Why did this approach not go there? I think we're pretty good at not kind of holding each other too much to those faults in there. What do you think, Chris?
I definitely think, if we would ever to get anything wrong, we definitely would never held accountability to each other. It's definitely like a shared thing. But I'm forever amazed at Gary's optimism. If we ever do, oh God, I'm the one who says, oh, we spent so much money on that. Oh, we wasted so much time, and I'll have a real moan about either how much money or time we spent on it. And Gary will always say, no, we didn't waste it because we learned that didn't work. And to me, that's just like, wow, okay, if you're forever looking at it like that, then it must just be so amazing to be like, okay, well, it was money well spent or time well spent because we learned that that didn't work, and I think that's just a great perspective on things.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
couldn't agree more. I think placing the value on learning means that there's always an ROI to be found.
I think the way that I talk to some of the team that work in our R&D is I like doing the hard things. I like doing hard things because they are hard. They're personally interesting, but it's a moat. If someone else wants to follow us, they've got to go through those hard steps and cross all those pieces to get there. So yes, it can be an expensive exercise, and yes, it's not always fruitful, but there's been several occasions where what we've tried has not worked, but it's given us a stepping stone and an insight into something that has worked. And if somebody wants to copy that or follow that, they've got to go through all those yards to get there. And we're kind of first movers, and I think that's you can join the dot. They say you can join the dots going back, but it's hard to join the dots going forward.
I'd imagine that innovation and iteration play a huge part of the culture of Disrupt Sports. What principles do you approach? And again, because I can imagine that you guys are both going to come from really opposing ends on this, right? Big top-down visionary versus sort of incremental, innovation through 1,000 iterations, so to speak. How do you push the envelope and particularly break new ground in the businesses that you scale with a philosophy around those two elements?
Maybe I'll kick off first. And I think
You
things have
first.
like I think in the early days, it would kind of be what my gut instinct was, or like what our gut instinct was on there. And that's not a great way, but that kind of gets you out the gates, right? Like we then moved into a lot of testing and learning. And I think the way that we look at like product R&D specifically now is like we work with our customers. We're not trying to throw darts at a wall. We're like trying to take things to market together for the benefit of everybody. And it's just kind of that like more sophisticated understanding of product R&D and channels to market. I think on a technology basis, it's the same, right? It's incremental pieces on there trying to fix the challenges you're having now, and that's something that Chris has really taught me. Is I try and build for 3 years time, and he's building for 6 months time, and we've got to get those stepping stones to get there.
Chris?
Yeah, I think for me, I think with any business really, you got to think about what problems you solve. And I think that's a constant thing in my mind is like, are we solving problems here or are we just trying something that's cool? Is that going to look really good? And no, is that a really cool thing that would look amazing, but is it actually solving a problem? And I think that's to me is something that's quite key when we're, throwing something new out.
I got a good one on that. So, it's on YouTube. Check it out. I said, Chris, we are going to send the world's first surfboard into space. And I remember your face being like, why? Why would we do that? No one's going to buy surfboards in space. And we were just like, well, I think it would be a good idea and it would be fun and we could just try this thing. And of course, no one bought anything off the back of it, but it got the team really enthusiastic to think about the way that we're approaching problems and marketing, not from the traditional sense. So I still look back at some of those pieces, like we broke the world record for the most surfing Santas. And I look at those ones and I go, those are the bits that we remember. I don't remember sitting in front of a desk and processing a few emails. Like you remember the big, fun, impactful things you get to do with the team as well.
Yeah, and sort of that sort of absurdity also defines who you are as a business. I mean, you got to do what it says on the tin and disrupt, even if that means sometimes stepping outside of the logic, the logical, incremental, iterative style of innovation.
Give Gary pocket money. Yeah.
I love this concept that sort of every now and then Gary just, we feed the chooks and Gary gets a bit of, money to go and innovate. Looking back, if you gents could go back to your younger selves, when you started out on this merry way, what would be the advice that you would give to each other as founders? Not necessarily the opposing person, but just you as a duo, knowing everything that you know now about scaling businesses globally.
You wanna go first, or you want me to go first?
Yeah, I think trust. I think both Gary and I personally struggle a little bit with trust. And it took me a long time, and I'm sure Gary was the same, to put that trust in each other. And in actual fact, like it was unnecessary to take that long. Like we worked so well together. So yeah, I think if I was to go back, I would say, trust what we're doing. And not just each other. It's the process. There were so many times where I'd be like, "Are we doing the right thing? Are we like, should we be doing this? Are we barking up the wrong tree? Are we, this doesn't feel right. It does feel right." Whereas a lot of the time, just go with your instinct and know that you know you're doing the right thing, and not to worry as much. Like, it'll be fine. Like, this doesn't work, someone else will work. And I used to worry, like I still worry now, but I used to worry so much, like, oh my God, like, if this doesn't work, the whole world is going to explode. But you're going to be fine.
Gary?
Yeah, I'm not, and I think the last bit Chris said there was really true as well. I remember like in the early days, like something small would go wrong and it would keep us both awake. And now you're like, it can happen forever. Every business has their own challenges all the time. You're always going to be putting out some kind of fire in there, and if you live with that much like stress on there, like you won't enjoy it. Like, what's the point in any of this if you don't have fun along the way? That's kind of the reason for being, right? So I think like learning that bit, I like the fact that we've learned to celebrate the small wins along the way as well, like all those milestones. When we have had like really good years, we've done something extraordinary for the team, or like just internally done things. And I think that that's been really important, because those are the milestones and the things people do talk about, like especially internally within the team. Like, those are the things that keep them enthused. I think if I was to go back to the early days, I would tell myself, yeah, not to sweat the small stuff. I think doing simple things really, really well beats trying to do everything mediocre. And I still have to remind myself of that on a regular basis. Like, do the thing, be known for the things that you're really, really good at, and build upon there, rather than trying to do everything and watch all the competition. I think I would tell myself to think bigger and back ourselves a bit more. Like, we were 20.
It's a very Gary answer, isn't it, Chris?
Yeah.
Go bigger. Go bigger.
I am thinking like, oh gosh, we're going to take over the world.
I would tell Chris to give me more pocket money to build new things.
I think just to kind of echo on what Gary is saying, you ask anyone who's in the early stages of business, like, how's it going? I can almost guarantee their answer will be, yeah, we've just got this one problem. And once we solve that, we'll be fine. And Gary and I, like, we joke because we always say that. It's always like, we just got this one problem. And like having any business, you learn it's like having a hose pipe with a hole in. And you plug that hole and then everyone will come up. And you plug that one and everyone will come up. And they're the problems. And the advice I always give to anyone who starts a business and says to me, yeah, we just got that one problem. It's stressing me out. But once I've got rid of that problem, I think I'll be fine. I always say, no, your problem is your worrying. Like, you've got to get to a point where you're okay with worrying and you can just carry on. And if you're okay with worrying every day, you're going to be fine.
I think that's fabulous advice. All right.
Now you've got to heed it. That's the...
Yeah. Look, like the Sparky that can't wire his own house. Look, we're all blind.
Yeah, that's me.
I always want to talk to Chris. Have you seen The Simpsons where he gets like the little hernias in his neck? I'm like, oh,
yeah. That's it.
At the end of each of these episodes on Unfiltered this season, we've got a bit of a tradition where I'm going to ask you the big 3+1. I'm going to alternate with who gets to go first, so you'll each have an opportunity to hear each other. Chris, I might start with you on this one. What is the single most important question we should ask ourselves?
In life or in business or... Okay, we're going to that way. The single most important question. Am I having fun? Like, to me, that is genuinely like all that matters in life, really. Because if you're doing something, you're not having fun. Everyone has a bad week, a bad day, a few bad days, and that's fine. You can have a bad day, a bad week, or whatever. But if you're always, always, always miserable, then like, what's the point? There's genuinely no point. And you don't, I have an old saying or an old thing that I used to think in people always think that you need to know what you're doing in life and where you're going, and like, oh, I want to do this and I want to do that, and I need to do this and I need to do that. Like, no one really knows what they're doing and where they're going. But what you do need to know is what you don't want to do. So if you're not happy doing something, you don't have to know what you're going to do next, but what you should know is what you don't want to do. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Gary, what is the single most important question we should be asking ourselves?
Where are we going next? Single most important question we should be asking is, I guess, what's it all for? You know, like, I think having perspective on things, like what is it you're doing and why are you doing it, and asking yourself that on a regular basis so you don't get swept up in the rat race of things happening all the time. I think that's probably my biggest one. And I think the other one to add to, because I'm going to cheat on there, is what if? What if the opposite of what you thought was true? You know, what if your limiting belief wasn't there? What if you could compete with the biggest out there? What if you could have more fun and do more things? I think that is the biggest thing that constrains us. Also, ask what is possible and what could happen if the opposite was true.
I think that's a great bonus answer. I'll allow it. I might. I'll stay with you, Gary. What is the most important thing to let go of?
Most important thing to let go of, it's going to be boring. I'm going to reiterate my past things, but is the limiting beliefs. You know, I think that we all have them from when we grow up. We learn how the world is based on our parents and the school we went to and where we grew up, and I think that informs our view of the world, and that's not necessarily the truth. So you've got to force yourself out of that. So I forgot even what the question was, but I think just limiting beliefs are the thing that holds you back. So really trying to question yourself a lot. That's an answer to a question I can't remember, but hopefully that's some kind of insight.
It's pretty aligned. Chris, what's the most important thing to let go of?
Yeah, I try not to just copy what Gary said there, but in a roundabout way, I guess it is because I spent a long time thinking that, oh, I wouldn't be able to do that because I didn't go to that school, or I wouldn't be able to do that because I didn't have like ridiculously rich parents, or I wouldn't be able to do that because I haven't traveled enough, or where in actual fact it probably took me till I was in my 30s to realize that you can do whatever you want. Like, and excuse the language, fuck anyone who thinks that you can't, because you can do it. And whether you're not educated enough, whether you're not wealthy enough, whether you're not athletic enough, try it. What's the worst that's going to happen? You're going to be back where you were anyway. So give it a go. Yeah.
Chris, what is a life well lived?
A life well lived to me would be is that you have little to no regrets. I think if you miss opportunities by not doing things or not trying things, to me you're restricting yourself. And even if it goes wrong, if it all fucks up, if you lose everything, at least you can be like, well, I found out it didn't work, and I found out it went wrong, and or I found out it went well. But if if at the end of it you're going, when I was 26, I had an opportunity to do this, and I wonder what would have happened if I had done that. I think to me that is not a life lived well. If you can look back in your life and think, I wonder what would happen if I'd done that, or I wonder what would happen if I'd done that. That's not where you want to be.
Gary, what's a life well lived?
Can I just copy Chris and say,
nah,
other things you don't do? No, a life well lived for me is family, friends, and adventure. I think that's my three guiding lights. Like, I love anything that is outdoors, with anything with adrenaline, anything that we can, you can enjoy your life in there, and ultimately no one's going to remember you for the extra hour of work you did. It'll be your family and friends. So make sure you're serving them well, and make sure have some guiding light out of life that's not just work.
Oh, that's a wonderful answer. I think, it's very funny, you guys have this amazing yin-yang dynamic. And I'll speak to you, Chris, but then I'll see this vein of Gary that he sort of instilled in you in one of those answers. I'm like, all right, that's a very Gary philosophy, and vice versa. Gary will be sitting in the big visionary state, and then all of a sudden he'll ground himself, and I'm like, that's where Chris has stepped in. So I think, you guys are an incredible example of where sort of 1 + 1 = 3, and I think both by virtue of just the nature of your relationship, but also the circumstances where you have been forced to wear each other's shoes, and also, I should say, walk in each other's shoes. Even in the very short time that we've been able to talk to one another, I think that has created, an incredible, the word that's sort of coming to mind is spark, but it's not that. It's sort of this energy that I can feel even through the screen. So the +1. Gary, what is the one question that I should have asked you both but didn't?
The one question you should have asked us both but didn't is, how did Chris getting deported from Australia impact the business? And
I knew you were going to say that.
Chris, I feel like there's a story there. So how did Chris getting deported impact the business?
Well, and him as well. Like, I think that's the important part, is like it had some profound impacts on you, right?
So yeah, to give it a bit of context, I lived in Sydney when we started the business, and my visa wasn't quite up to date. And Gary and I went to America to open up the US office, and we spent a few weeks out there, like meeting suppliers. And the original plan was for Gary to stay in the US and kind of expand the business there, and I to come back to Australia. So I flew back to Australia, leaving Gary in LA, and my wife and I was living in Australia. I've been living in Australia for 2 years, and I landed back in Sydney and got pulled aside. And
Sir, please come with us.
It was. Yeah, it was a bit of a traumatic experience. They literally took my phone off me, took everything off me. They took me off site into a prison, and I was kept there for 2 days and wasn't allowed to speak to anyone. Couldn't make my wife and my parents, so they were all going crazy, like trying to get through. And then after 2 days, they chucked me back on a flight, and I wasn't allowed to come back to Australia for 3 years. So I flew back to the UK and sat in my parents' spare room for 48 hours, hiding under a sheet, and thinking no one will notice. And then I eventually thought, well, I can either sit here and feel sorry for myself and cry about how traumatic it was and how, oh God, my life in Sydney is over, or I can be like, well, do you know what? We were 6-8 months into the business, and I could see then it was going to do well. And I thought we can take this business and we've just accelerated it into a global business. And I think from then I went and found an office and found an accelerator in the UK that helped me grow that business over here, and we kind of expanded and now back to my previous philosophy, I kind of look at it back, like people sometimes say to me, oh, do you wish it didn't happen? And I guess the answer is no, because we wouldn't be here today if that hadn't happened. Like, yes, it was a traumatic experience, and no, it wasn't very nice, and no, it wasn't very fun, but I would go through it again to know that we were still here, and because I think it's kind of made certainly our relationship and the business strong and where it is today.
I think to probably add onto some bits onto there as well, like it was really traumatic specifically for Chris on there, and I think that it was premature for us opening up another country so soon. And it was definitely hard and a lot of late nights between us all. But like we wouldn't have gone that quick unless we'd been pushed to on there. I think it also for me accelerated Chris and my like understanding of each other. There was one point where Chris was like, "Well, that's it. Gary's going to find someone else to run the business now," and he's not, and I was like, "What do you mean? No, that's never going to happen. Like, what do you mean?" And I think that building that level of trust probably helped in there. Like you mentioned before, we had to kind of split roles a bit more and do those pieces as well. And I think that gave Chris a lot of self-confidence, I think, in himself running the whole business unit in Europe as well. And so there was a lot of good that came out the back of it. I also got the chance. I mean, this is probably fun. So Chris thought, I know, I'm going to just fly under the radar, not say anything. This is how our different personalities work. I went to Canberra and I went and met with the Prime Minister and I went and met with the Foreign Secretary. And I was like, this is bullshit that we don't have an early stage innovation visa and we can't do this. And we did round tables and they ended up introducing a visa subclass for early stage innovation companies, which was great. It didn't affect Chris, but it affected a bunch of other companies now get those visas. And I'm very proud to have been part of that. I thought that was the right thing to do for Chris to be like, hey, man, I'm standing up for you. I'm standing up for you and I'm pushing this. And when we later talked about it, Chris was like, that was the most traumatic thing because I wanted to bury my head.
He just wanted it to lurk in the shadows, yeah.
That's our different personality.
I think I was literally hiding under a cover. And then I think my wife called me and said, you're on the cover of the Sydney Morning Herald. Because you've been deported, and I was like, "Oh God!" And Gary's like, "Great news! You're on the cover of Sydney Morning Herald."
he's out the front of Parliament with the paper, going, "Look at this!"
Yeah.
But what like
down through Parliament House, we got her through there. So yeah, it was good fun.
But what a gift though! Like hindsight 2020, and with all due respect, Chris, to what has to have been a very, very traumatic experience. As they say, necessity bears innovation, and what an incredible sliding doors moment. To your point, Chris, that catalyzed so much more learning, so much more acceleration. It's almost like throwing kerosene on a fire, right? In terms of scaling that business. And I think that it's what an amazing position of privilege that the three of us can sit here and laugh about it now. With all of the good that it's done, and we thank you for the Chris class of visa now that supports innovators in early stage startups. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute delight. I wish you nothing but success. We will link to all of the work that you're doing with Disrupt Sports amongst all of the amazing businesses that you guys have founded since then. But I wish you all the best, and thank you again for your wisdom and your generosity of insight.
Amazing. Thank you for having us.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you so much. It's been enjoyable.